Welcome, pilgrims. It's good to see you out on this last Wednesday evening of August. The cooler weather assures us that fall is approaching, and soon the trees will be turning into a beautiful array of color. Fall will certainly be a welcome reprieve from this long, hot summer. The cooler weather also makes our time together out on the trail more enjoyable. It appears that one of the greatest challenges that we face is to really listen. And so our word for this week is listen, that we'll toss into our backpack for the journey that lies ahead. It is quite challenging, it seems, for us to listen to the sounds around us and to one another. Sometimes when we're out on the trail, suddenly we become aware of the birds calling in the trees. Now, most certainly, they were calling before we heard them, but we're not listening. So it was as if they were not there at all. But once we are aware of them calling to one another, we not only hear, but we have to stop to listen. It is only when we stop to listen that we can distinguish one call from another, one bird calling another bird. There are times also when we're out on the trail, when we turn a bend or descend into a valley, that suddenly we become aware of this feeling of silence. We look up and there are no sounds, no birds, no stream running before us, nothing, no breeze in the trees, nothing, only silence. And there is a sound to silence. It's the absence of sound. It is certainly one thing to hear and quite another thing to listen. We often say to someone, "Do you hear me?" when what we are really asking is, "Are you listening to me?" We often vow to become better listeners, but soon we discover how truly challenging that is. To listen, we have to concentrate on what is being said to us. We have to listen carefully to every word that is spoken, every word that is not spoken, and sometimes we have to listen carefully to the words that are chosen by the one we are listening to us. To really listen, we have to ask clarifying questions so that we can determine if we are truly listening to what is being said to us. To be a good listener, we have to listen and resist the temptation to begin to frame our response before the one speaking to us is finished. When I was quite young, someone I trusted said to me, "Believe only half what you hear." For a long time, that saying troubled me, though I knew it had been around a long time. But then one day I realized I probably don't hear half what is said to me, and I'm listening to even less. So I had to be careful about what I thought I had heard. Another thing that I have discovered is that we can hear things that people don't even say. You see, when someone is speaking to us, but we're not really listening to them, we often complete their sentences with what we might say. We do this because we only partially heard what they were saying, and our minds ran on ahead to some conclusion that we assumed. I don't know about you, but I find it quite irritating when people try to finish my sentences in which I'm expressing my thoughts with their thoughts. And what becomes even more irritating to me is when they go out and tell someone what I said, which is not actually what I said, but what they said in their minds as they finished my thoughts with their thoughts. When we finally happen upon a good listener, we often find our conversations quite surprising. Surprising because we don't have to talk over a good listener. Surprising because good listeners do not interrupt us while we're talking. Surprising because good listeners don't try to finish our sentences. Good listeners are comfortable with the silence that inevitably comes while we're trying to gather our thoughts and find the very right words to express ourselves. Good listeners gently explore with questions what they thought they heard so that they can be assured that they understand what we're trying to say. Good listeners leave us with a feeling that we have truly been not only heard, but understood. Overall, if we listen, we find ways to gather wisdom for our journey along the trail of life. When we listen, we may hear words of wisdom from our peers, our friends, our co-workers, the people who share the pew with us, our teachers, and sometimes wisdom comes to us as we listen to perfect strangers. While listening, we glean wisdom for the journey ahead. For that reason, I have chosen some words from Psalms to guide our reflection for this evening on the word we have chosen to carry with us, listen. That verse will now appear on your screen. Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom for the future. Excuse me, those words are not from Psalms, but from Proverbs. But as we spend these next few minutes together, let's give some thoughtful reflection to what it means to speak, to be heard, and to be listened to. Let's ponder these thoughts for the next few moments. We often say to small children, "Put on your listening ears." Are there times when it would have been wise for us to have put on our listening ears? Jesus said, "Let everyone with ears listen." What are the major differences between hearing and listening? How often during the day do we suddenly hear a voice speaking to us and realize we are not listening? Why do we find it so difficult to listen to the one who is speaking to us before we begin thinking of our response? Why are we inclined to ignore the voices we should be listening to? How often do we hear someone saying to us, "Are you listening to me?" What are the unmistakable signs that someone is not listening to us and we haven't been listening to them? When was the last time we listened to the voice speaking inside of us? When was the last time we listened for the voice of God in the silence? Why are we able to easily recall the words of criticism we heard? Why do we give them such power? Why do we find it difficult to recall words of affirmation and blessing we heard? Why did we refuse to listen to them? And now, a word of wisdom for the journey. To acquire wisdom, we should do less talking and more listening. It has been good to share this stretch of the journey with you tonight. I hope in the days ahead, the cooler days will call you out into God's wonderful creation and into the silence of your heart so that you may hear God speaking to you and may say to God, "Speak, for I am listening." See you next week on The Journey.